A little girl, barely 8 years old, held out a crusty piece of bread to a fierce warrior chief. And in that moment, she changed everything. The act was so simple, so pure, it left a dozen battle-hardened men stunned, their weapons frozen in their hands. What happened in that dusty canyon would ripple through 2 communities forever, proving that sometimes the smallest gesture can tear down walls built by years of mistrust. If you are watching this on your screen, take a second to grab your phone and hit follow, like, or share. That one click means a lot and helps us keep telling stories that matter. The sun blazed high overhead, scorching the dry earth as Thomas Hargrove steered his creaky wagon through a narrow canyon trail. His wife, Ellen, sat beside him, her fingers digging into the wooden bench, her eyes darting nervously to the rocky cliffs above. In the back, their daughter, Lily, barely 8, fiddled with a rag doll, humming softly, oblivious to the danger hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Thomas kept his gaze sharp, scanning the ridges for any sign of trouble. This was no man's land, where settler trails cut through sacred tribal grounds, and every shadow could hide a threat. Stories of ambushes and vanished travelers haunted his thoughts, passed around campfires like warnings carved in stone. Lily's small voice cut through the silence. "Papa, my stomach is growling." Ellen reached into their dwindling supplies, pulling out a hard, stale chunk of bread, the last they had. She handed it to Lily with a tight smile. "Eat slow, honey. We have a long way to go." Their food was nearly gone, and the next settlement was 2 days off. Thomas gripped the reins tighter, his heart heavy with the weight of keeping his family alive in this unforgiving land. The canyon walls seemed to close in as Thomas spotted movement above. Dark figures appeared along the ridge, first 1, then 5, then too many to count. Warriors on horseback, their weapons catching the sunlight like flashes of fire. Thomas's hand twitched toward the shotgun at his side, but he stopped himself. One wrong move could spark a fight they would not survive. "Ellen," he whispered, keeping his voice steady. "Hold Lily close. Do not let her see." Ellen's breath hitched, but she nodded, pulling their daughter against her. The warriors descended with eerie precision, their horses navigating the steep slopes like they were born to it. As they neared, Thomas saw their painted faces, fierce and unreadable. The leader, a man with weathered skin and eyes like flint, carried an air of authority that demanded respect. This was Chief Tarak Stone, though Thomas did not know his name. Beside him rode a younger warrior, Joran Holt, his hand resting on a blade, his gaze sharp with distrust. The group fanned out, surrounding the wagon in a tight circle, their horses snorting in the dust. Thomas felt his pulse pounding in his ears. There was no escape, no place to hide. The warriors' eyes locked on the family, sizing them up. Chief Tarak raised a hand, and the silence that followed was suffocating. His gaze swept over Thomas, then Ellen, before settling on Lily, who peeked out from her mother's arms, clutching her bread. What happened next was not what anyone expected. Not the settlers, not the warriors, and certainly not the chief himself. Lily looked up at Chief Tarak, her wide eyes free of fear, filled only with a child's curiosity. She did not see a warrior or an enemy, just a man. The chief's face stayed hard as stone, but something flickered in his eyes. He had faced countless settlers, seen their fear, their lies, their defiance. But this girl, she just stared, unafraid, like she was trying to figure out who he was beneath the war paint. Joran Holt shifted in his saddle, his fingers tightening on his blade, reading the chief's pause as weakness. The other warriors watched, tense, waiting for a signal. Thomas kept his hands visible, knowing one wrong move could end them all. Ellen's breathing was shallow, her arms wrapped protectively around Lily. But Lily, oblivious to the danger, nibbled her bread, breaking off tiny pieces with care. She had learned young that nothing went to waste out here. The frontier did not forgive carelessness. Chief Tarak spoke, his voice sharp in a language Thomas could not understand. But the tone was clear, demanding, not welcoming. Thomas swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "We are just traveling through, heading west to join other folks. We do not want any trouble." The chief's eyes narrowed, searching for a lie. He had learned to spot deceit in settlers, the nervous tics, the shifting glances, but this man seemed honest, scared but truthful. Joran Holt urged his horse closer, speaking quickly in their tongue, his words dripping with impatience. Thomas did not need to understand the language to know the young warrior wanted blood, not talk. Chief Tarek raised his hand again, silencing him. His gaze drifted back to Lily, who was still picking at her bread, her small fingers careful not to drop a crumb. Something about her sparked a memory in the chief, a memory of his own son, long gone, sharing a scrap of food during a starving winter. The chief noticed the family's sparse supplies, the way they carried themselves. These were not greedy land grabbers. They were desperate, running from something or chasing a faint hope. But desperation did not change the rules. This was sacred ground, and trespassers paid a price sometimes with their lives. Joran spoke again, his voice louder, urging action. The other warriors murmured, restless, their hands on their weapons. They had dealt with settlers before, and the code was simple. Take what they had or drive them out. One warrior, scarred from battles past, leaned forward on his horse and spat on the ground near the wagon's wheel. His lips curled into a sneer as he eyed the family's meager belongings. Ellen flinched, pulling Lily tighter, her knuckles turning white against the child's dress. The warrior laughed low, a sound that echoed off the canyon walls, mocking their vulnerability. Thomas's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent, knowing words could ignite the powder keg. The scarred man circled closer, his horse kicking up dust that stung their eyes, forcing Ellen to shield Lily's face with her apron. Joran nodded approvingly, his own sneer matching as he dismounted and kicked at a loose stone, sending it clattering toward Thomas's feet. The warriors' horses pawed the earth restlessly, their snorts building into a chorus that drowned out Lily's soft humming. Chief Tarek watched without intervening, his silence amplifying the intimidation, letting his men test the settlers' resolve. Ellen's eyes welled up, but she blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall in front of them. Chief Tarek's voice cut through the tension, his English rough but clear. You cross our land, you pay for passage. Thomas's stomach dropped. What do you want? We do not have much. The chief gestured at the wagon. Everything. Your supplies, your horses. You walk. Ellen stifled a gasp. Without their wagon, they would never survive the desert, not with a child. Thomas's voice cracked. Please, we have got a little girl. Take our things, and we are dead before the next town. The chief's face did not soften. That is not my concern. Trespass has a cost. Joran dismounted, a grim smile on his face as he moved toward the wagon, ready to take what was demanded. The other warriors watched, some nodding in agreement, their hunger and anger fueling their resolve. The tribe had suffered too long, game driven off, rivers fouled, children starving. This was justice, plain and simple. But then Lily did something no one saw coming. She had been listening, her young mind piecing together the adults' words. They needed things, and she had something to give. Standing up in the wagon, she held out her bread to Chief Tarek. If you are hungry, you can have this, she said, her voice clear and steady. The canyon went silent, the words hitting like a thunderclap. Joran froze, his jaw dropping. The warriors exchanged stunned looks, unsure what to make of this tiny girl offering her food to their leader. Chief Tarek stared at the bread in her small hand, his mind reeling. In all his years, no settler had ever offered him anything but threats or bribes. This child, with nothing to spare, was giving him her last meal. The bread was not much stale, barely a bite, but it carried a weight he could not ignore. It reminded him of his son, offering a scrap of meat to a starving elder, even as the tribe went hungry. That boy was gone now, taken by sickness brought by settlers. Yet here was this girl, their enemy's daughter, showing the same heart. Joran's voice broke the silence, sharp and angry in their tongue. She is mocking us, a trick to save her family. The warriors murmured, their distrust flaring. They had seen too many settler lies, false promises, tainted gifts. To them, this was just a clever ploy, using a child's innocence. Joran stepped closer, his blade gleaming. Take their supplies, let the desert deal with them. Thomas and Ellen exchanged terrified glances, sensing the danger spiking. Ellen reached for Lily, ready to pull her back, but Thomas grabbed her arm, stopping her. Something in the chief's face had shifted, just enough to give him pause. A young warrior at the edge of the circle suddenly burst into laughter, slapping his thigh as if the girl's offer was the funniest joke he'd heard. His chuckles spread to two others, who pointed at Lily's tiny hand, mimicking her gesture with exaggerated motions, holding out imaginary bread and pretending to eat it greedily. Ellen's face flushed red, her lips pressing into a thin line as she glared at them, but she held her tongue. Thomas stood taller, his fists balling at his sides, but he forced himself to stay put. The laughing warriors circled the wagon, their mockery growing louder, one even tossing a pebble that bounced off the wheel near Lily. Chief Tarek remained silent, his eyes fixed on the bread, but Joran joined in, snorting derisively and waving his hand dismissively at the child. Lily's brow furrowed slightly, but she kept her arm extended, unwavering. The laughter echoed, building tension until one warrior pretended to snatch the air, as if stealing the bread, causing his companions to roar with amusement. Ellen's hands trembled as she clutched the wagon side, her nails digging into the wood. Chief Tarek moved slowly, dismounting with deliberate care. The warriors tensed, uncertain. Joran's eyes narrowed, his hand tight on his blade. The chief approached the wagon, stopping just out of reach of Lily's outstretched hand. Her face showed no fear, only trust, as she held out the bread. What he did next would decide everything, peace or blood. His fingers closed around the bread, careful not to touch her hand, accepting the gift with a reverence that silenced the canyon. Joran exploded. "What are you doing?" he shouted in their language. "You forget our losses? You forget your son?" The name hit Tarek like a blow, but it did not shake him. His son would have done the same as this girl shared without hesitation, without hate. Tarek took a bite of the bread, chewing slowly, his eyes locked on Lily. She beamed, delighted her gift was accepted. That smile cracked something deep inside him, something he had buried under years of war and grief. The warriors were divided. Some, like Joran, saw betrayal, their anger fueled by memories of loss. Others, older men with children of their own, saw something else: purity, a reminder of what they fought for. Joran raised his blade, pointing at the wagon. "They are the enemy. Their kind stole our land, our food, our lives. And you eat their crumbs?" The warriors shifted, some gripping their weapons tighter, others hesitating, caught by the girl's gesture. Tarek finished the bread, his voice steady but heavy. "This child has more honor than many warriors." He spoke in English, making sure the settlers heard. In their tongue, he turned to Joran. "I know lies. I know tricks. This was neither." The warriors watched, torn between loyalty and doubt. Tarek faced them fully. "Sometimes the spirits speak through those who do not know hate. This girl reminds us of that." Ellen's breath caught, hope flickering in her chest. Thomas squeezed her hand, sensing the shift but knowing it was fragile. Joran was not done. His grief, his brother killed in a settler raid, burned too hot. "If you will not uphold our laws, I will," he declared, raising his blade. He stepped toward the wagon, his eyes blazing with pain and fury. But before he could act, 3 older warriors dismounted, placing themselves between him and the family. The eldest, Grey Wolf, spoke calmly. "You are blind, Joran. This girl gave what she could, when she could have kept it. That is honor." Joran's blade wavered, his anger clashing with confusion. These were men he had fought beside, men he trusted. Yet they stood against him, protecting settlers. "She is their child," he spat. Tarek's voice was soft but firm. "She is a child, nothing more, and she sees what we have forgotten." Lily, still standing, looked at the tense faces around her. She did not understand the anger, the history, the stakes. All she knew was sharing. "Are you all hungry?" she asked, her voice cutting through the standoff. "We do not have much, but Mama says sharing makes things better." The words stunned everyone. Joran's blade dropped to his side, his resolve cracking. Even he could not ignore the sincerity in her voice, the absence of fear or guile. Grey Wolf felt a lump in his throat. His own granddaughter was Lily's age, learning the old ways back at camp. Would she show such courage? He was not sure. The warriors' faces softened, some seeing their own children in Lily's act. Tarek saw it too, the spark of something new, a chance to break the cycle of hate. "Nothing erases our pain," he told Joran, "but we can choose what we become because of it." Thomas spoke, his voice careful. "Lily does not know your troubles are ours. She just knows to share, to be kind." Tarek nodded. "Maybe that is wisdom we have all lost." But before hope could settle, hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. A new group approached, fast and armed. The fragile peace Lily had sparked was about to face a new threat, one that might shatter everything. The riders crested the ridge, weapons glinting. They were settlers, led by a hard-eyed man named Amos Reed, known for his hatred of the tribes. His grin was cold as he took in the scene. "Looks like trouble with the locals," he called. Do not worry. We will handle it. He raised his rifle, aiming at Tarak. Time to teach these savages a lesson. The air turned electric with danger, the canyon ready to explode into violence. Tarak stepped in front of the wagon, shielding the family he had been ready to punish moments before. His warriors flanked him, weapons ready. These people are under our protection, he declared. Amos's face twisted in disbelief. You are siding with them, Hargrove? Thomas found his voice. These men showed more honor today than you ever have. Joran, his anger redirected, stepped beside Tarak. The girls showed us who they could be. You show us who we will not become. The warriors formed a tight circle around the wagon, their stance clear. Amos and his men hesitated, outnumbered and outmatched on unfamiliar ground. With curses and threats, they retreated, their shouts fading into the canyon. When the dust cleared, Tarak turned to Thomas. You pass safely. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them a child's kindness reminded warriors of honor. Ellen hugged Lily, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely enough. As the wagon rolled away, Tarak held the last crumb of bread, marveling at its weight. Such a small thing to change so much, he said. Joran, his anger gone, asked, How did you know? Tarak smiled faintly. Sometimes the spirits speak through children who have not learned to hate. The warriors watched the wagon disappear, carrying a family who would never forget this day. In that canyon, a new understanding took root, one that would spread like wildfire, shifting the path of two peoples. If you are watching this, grab your phone and hit follow, like, or share. That small click helps us keep sharing stories like this, stories that remind us what is possible when we see each other's humanity. Thomas paused the wagon just beyond the bend, his hands shaking on the reins as he turned to Ellen. Her face was pale, but she managed a weak smile, brushing Lily's hair back with trembling fingers. Lily looked up at them, her eyes bright, unaware of how close death had come. The family sat in silence for a moment, the canyon's echoes fading behind them. Thomas finally exhaled, starting the horses again, the wheels creaking forward into the unknown. Ellen whispered a prayer under her breath, her voice barely audible over the wind. Lily hummed her tune once more, clutching her doll tighter. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that seemed less threatening now. Thomas glanced back one last time, the warriors' figures small in the distance. Life on the frontier pressed on, but this day would linger in their hearts forever. Back at the tribal camp, Chief Tarak gathered his people around the fire that night, the stars overhead witnessing his words. He held up the remaining crumb of bread, his voice steady as he recounted the encounter. The elders nodded solemnly, their faces etched with surprise. Women clutched their children closer, imagining the scene. Young warriors like Joran sat silent, their earlier rage replaced by quiet reflection. Grey Wolf added his account, his gravelly voice emphasizing the child's bravery. Murmurs spread through the group, some shaking their heads in wonder. Tarak crushed the crumb and scattered it to the wind, a symbol of change. The fire crackled higher, illuminating faces now softened by the tale. The tribe slept that night with a new story to pass down, one of unexpected mercy. Months later, word of the canyon incident reached a distant settlement, whispered in saloons and around dinner tables. Settlers debated it fiercely, some scoffing at the notion of tribal honor, others pausing in thought. A grizzled trapper slammed his mug down, declaring it a miracle. Women shared it with wide eyes, hugging their own children tighter. Children reenacted the scene in play, offering sticks as bread to imaginary warriors. The story grew, twisting slightly with each telling, but the core remained a girl's gift altering fates. Preachers used it in sermons, calling for understanding. Skeptics dismissed it as legend, but those who believed felt a spark of hope. The frontier buzzed with the tale, bridging divides in quiet ways. Lives shifted subtly, influenced by one small act. In a hidden valley, Amos Reed nursed his wounds from the retreat, his men grumbling around a dim campfire. He paced angrily, kicking at embers that flew into the night. One rider suggested revenge, his voice low and eager. Amos stopped, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the flames. He grabbed his rifle, checking it methodically, his silence speaking volumes. The group fell quiet, sensing his fury building. A younger man hesitated, mentioning the child's role, but Amos snarled, silencing him. Plans formed in hushed tones, maps drawn in the dirt. The fire died down, but their resentment burned brighter. Vengeance loomed, a shadow over the peace just forged. The night air carried their whispers, a threat unspoken but real. Chief Tarek awoke before dawn, slipping out to a sacred rock overlooking the canyon. He knelt, tracing patterns in the sand with a stick, his face lined with new resolve. Grey Wolf joined him silently, handing over a feather from his pouch. Tarek tied it to the stick, planting it firmly in the ground. They sat watching the sun rise, colors painting the sky in hues of redemption. Joran approached hesitantly, his head bowed in respect. Tarek placed a hand on his shoulder, no words needed. The three stood together, the wind whispering through the rocks. Birds called out, breaking the quiet with songs of renewal. The day began with a promise of different paths. Harmony echoed in their shared silence, a bond strengthened by trial. Lily, now safe in a new settlement, drew pictures in the dirt outside their cabin, recreating the warriors' faces with sticks. Neighbors' children gathered around, wide-eyed as she described the painted men. One boy laughed, calling it make-believe, but Lily stood firm, her small chin lifted defiantly. Ellen watched from the doorway, a proud smile crossing her lips. Thomas joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. The children listened closer, their skepticism turning to awe. Lily offered them berries from her pocket, mimicking her gift. Laughter rang out, pure and free. The drawing became a game, warriors turning into friends in their play. Community bonds grew from one child's story, spreading warmth. A lone scout from the tribe rode back to the canyon weeks later, finding fresh tracks that weren't their own. He dismounted, examining boot prints near the sacred stones. His face hardened, fingers tracing the disturbances. He gathered samples of torn cloth caught on thorns, tucking them away. Racing back to camp, he burst into the circle, holding up the evidence. Warriors gathered, their expressions shifting to alarm. Tarek examined the cloth, his brow furrowing deeply. Murmurs rose, hands reaching for weapons instinctively. The scout described the scene vividly, pointing out signs of spying. Tension rebuilt, old fears resurfacing in clenched jaws. Preparations began immediately. A watchful eye turned outward once more. Ellen sat by the fire in their new home, mending clothes while Lily slept nearby. Thomas entered, carrying news from town about increased patrols. He sat heavily, rubbing his temples. Ellen set her needle down, her eyes meeting his with unspoken worry. They held hands across the table, the silence heavy with what-ifs. A knock at the door startled them, a neighbor bearing gifts of food. Conversation turned to the canyon tale, the neighbor's voice filled with admiration. Thomas recounted it briefly, his voice steady. Ellen added details, her tone grateful. The neighbor left with a promise of support, strengthening their ties. The family embraced, finding solace in unity. Joran trained young recruits in the camp, demonstrating blade techniques with fierce precision. One boy fumbled, dropping his weapon, and Joran paused, remembering Lily's steadiness. He picked it up gently, handing it back without scolding. The boy looked surprised, straightening his posture. Other trainees watched, noting the change in Joran's demeanor. He spoke of honor in actions, not just words, his voice carrying new depth. The session ended with nods of understanding, the group dispersing thoughtfully. Joran lingered, sharpening his blade under the stars. A soft wind carried distant howls, but he felt calmer. Growth emerged from reflection, a warrior evolving. Years passed, and the canyon became a meeting ground for tentative trades between settlers and tribe. Thomas returned one day, bearing goods, greeted by Tarek with a firm handshake. Lily, now older, stood beside her father, offering handmade beads. Warriors accepted them graciously, returning carved figures. Laughter mixed with bartering, faces relaxed in mutual respect. Children from both sides played nearby, chasing each other without barriers. Ellen watched from afar, her heart full. Stories were exchanged around a shared fire, building bridges. The sun set on a scene of harmony, the bread's legacy enduring. Peace flourished where hatred once ruled, a testament to one act's power.